The exodus began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. A profile updated here, a departure notice there, the kind of routine professional transitions that happen every day across the legal profession. But then the trickle became a stream, and the stream became a flood, and suddenly the pattern was impossible to ignore. Thousands upon thousands of lawyers and legal professionals, their credentials proudly displayed on LinkedIn for the world to see, their careers built inside the most powerful legal institution in the United States, were changing their employment status to the same simple, devastating phrase, former Department of Justice. Not former DOJ attorney moving to private practice for a better salary, not former prosecutor pursuing new opportunities, just former, past tense, gone. And the sheer volume of departures happening simultaneously, visible to anyone with an internet connection and the ability to search, was telling a story that the administration could not spin, could not suppress, and apparently had not anticipated would become quite so publicly, quite so immediately, quite so undeniably obvious. This is not a story about normal attrition. This is not a story about career advancement or retirement or the natural ebb and flow of personnel in a large government agency. This is a story about the wholesale dismantling of institutional expertise, about the deliberate hollowing out of an institution that has served as the backbone of federal law enforcement for generations, and about what happens when political loyalty becomes the only credential that matters and professional competence becomes a liability rather than an asset. The LinkedIn profiles tell the story in a way that press releases and official statements never could, because they are individual human decisions made by individual legal professionals, documented in real time on a platform designed to showcase professional accomplishment and career progression. When thousands of those individual decisions point in the same direction at the same time, when the cumulative effect becomes visible not through leaked internal memos, but through publicly searchable employment data, the narrative writes itself. The Department of Justice has always been understood, at least in the ideal conception of American governance, as an institution that operates with a degree of independence from direct political control. The notion that the Attorney General and the lawyers who work under that office should be pursuing justice rather than executing the political will of the president is foundational to the rule of law as it has been understood in democratic societies. That independence has never been absolute, has never been perfectly realized, and has always existed in tension with the reality that the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the President, and that administrations naturally seek to advance their policy priorities through the legal system, but there have been norms, conventions, understandings about where the lines are drawn, about what constitutes appropriate political influence, and what crosses over into the corruption of the legal process itself. Those norms have been under extraordinary strain throughout the Trump administration's second term, but the current wave of departures suggests that something fundamental has broken. The lawyers who are leaving are not doing so quietly or gradually. They are leaving in numbers large enough to be statistically extraordinary, visible enough to be tracked through public platforms, and clustered enough in time to suggest that specific triggering events have driven the decision to abandon careers that many of them spent years building. The LinkedIn data, which can be analyzed by anyone with access to the platform's search functions, shows a pattern of departures that accelerated sharply in the weeks following specific administration actions, specific directives from leadership, and specific public statements that made clear what the Department of Justice was expected to prioritize and what it was expected to ignore. The administration's initial response to the emerging story of the mass departure was predictable in its contours, if not in its specific rhetoric. Spokespeople suggested that the lawyers leaving were disgruntled partisans who never supported the president's agenda, that their departure represented an overdue clearing out of dead wood and resistance elements embedded in the bureaucracy, that the lawyers being replaced would be better, more loyal, more committed to the vision of justice that the administration sought to implement. This framing, which has been the default response to virtually every instance of institutional pushback or personnel controversy during the Trump years, ran into an immediate problem when applied to the LinkedIn exodus. The lawyers whose profiles were publicly documenting their departures were not anonymous bureaucrats whose credentials could be questioned or whose motives could be impugned without consequence. They were named individuals with documented track records, with years or decades of service, with specialized expertise in areas of law that take years to develop, and that cannot simply be replaced by hiring loyalists with law degrees and political connections. The profile data revealed something else that made the administration's dismissive response harder to sustain. The lawyers leaving were not concentrated in political appointee positions or in offices known for handling politically sensitive cases. They were leaving from across the organizational chart, from offices that handle routine criminal prosecutions, from divisions that oversee civil litigation, from units that provide legal guidance to other government agencies, from the ranks of career professionals who form the institutional backbone of the department's operations. When a politically appointed official leaves an administration, that is news, but it is also normal. When thousands of career professionals leave simultaneously, when the expertise walking out the door represents decades of accumulated institutional knowledge, when the departures are visible enough that professional networking platforms are lighting up with farewell posts and updated employment statuses, that is something else entirely. The specific catalyst for the current wave of departures, insofar as it can be traced through the timing of LinkedIn updates and the substance of farewell statements that some departing lawyers chose to post, appears to be connected to a series of directives from the administration that career prosecutors and lawyers found to be incompatible with their professional obligations and ethical responsibilities. The details of those directives have emerged through a combination of leaked internal communications, congressional testimony, and the public statements of departing officials who chose to speak on the record about why they could no longer remain in their positions. The picture that emerges is of an administration that has moved beyond the kind of normal political pressure that exists in any department of justice to something that career professionals describe as the systematic subordination of legal judgment to political outcome. Prosecutors have described being directed to pursue cases not because the evidence supported prosecution, but because the targets were politically valuable. Lawyers handling civil matters have described being instructed to abandon defenses of government positions when those positions conflicted with administration priorities, even when the legal obligations of the department required continued defense. Attorneys providing legal guidance to other agencies have described being pressured to provide opinions that reached predetermined conclusions rather than analyzing the law as they understood it. In each case, the pattern is the same. Legal professionals trained to apply law to facts and to provide advice based on their best professional judgment being told that their judgment is subordinate to political direction and that their role is to find legal justifications for desired outcomes rather than to provide independent analysis of what the law permits. For lawyers who take seriously their ethical obligations, their professional responsibilities, and their oath to support and defend the Constitution, these directives create an impossible situation. Remaining in position means becoming complicit in the corruption of legal process. Leaving means abandoning an institution they believed in and surrendering the field to those willing to subordinate law to politics. The mass departure visible through LinkedIn suggests that thousands of legal professionals faced with that impossible choice have decided that they cannot, in good conscience, remain. The decision to document that departure publicly, to update their LinkedIn profiles with their new status as former DOJ employees, represents a form of professional protest, a way of creating a public record of institutional breakdown that cannot be easily dismissed or denied. The consequences of this mass exodus extend far beyond the immediate operational challenges facing the Department of Justice. Though those challenges are significant, institutional knowledge is not something that can be quickly replaced. The expertise required to handle complex federal prosecutions, to navigate intricate regulatory frameworks, to provide sound legal guidance on matters of constitutional significance, develops over years of practice and mentorship and accumulated experience. When thousands of lawyers possessing that expertise walk out the door simultaneously, the institution they leave behind is fundamentally weakened in ways that cannot be remedied by hiring replacements, no matter how politically loyal those replacements might be. The morale effects ripple through the remaining staff. The The lawyers who stay, whether by choice or necessity, are working in an institution that has just lost a significant portion of its professional talent that is operating under political direction many of them find troubling, and that is now visibly hemorrhaging the kind of experienced personnel that make effective legal work possible. The message sent by the mass departure is not lost on those who remain. When your colleagues, your mentors, the people whose professional judgment you respected, decide in large numbers that they can no longer continue in good conscience, that creates a crisis of institutional legitimacy that affects everyone still inside the building. The international dimension of this story has received less attention than it deserves, but matters enormously. The United States Department of Justice has long been regarded, for better or worse, as a model of how democratic societies can maintain professional law enforcement and prosecution systems that operate with at least a degree of independence from direct political control. Foreign governments that cooperate with the United States on matters of international law enforcement, that extradite suspects to face American justice, that rely on assurances from American prosecutors that cases will be handled professionally and that defendants will receive fair treatment, are watching the mass departure of American legal professionals with deep concern. The credibility of American commitments in international legal cooperation depends on the perception that the people making those commitments are professional law enforcement officials, rather than political operatives executing partisan directives. When thousands of those professionals publicly document their departure from the institution, when the visible exodus suggests institutional breakdown rather than normal personnel transition, foreign governments begin to question whether cooperation with American law enforcement serves their interests or exposes them to political manipulation. The consequences of that loss of confidence are not merely theoretical. Extradition requests may be denied. Information sharing may be curtailed. International investigations that depend on American participation may be compromised. The damage to American standing in the international legal community is real and potentially long-lasting. The political ramifications are complex and cut across the conventional partisan divide in ways that make simple analysis difficult. The Republican Party has long positioned itself as the party of law and order, has built electoral coalitions around support for law enforcement, and has criticized Democrats for being soft on crime and insufficiently supportive of prosecutors and police. The spectacle of thousands of federal prosecutors and lawyers fleeing the Department of Justice under a Republican administration creates a cognitive dissonance that the party has struggled to address coherently. Some Republicans have chosen to embrace the administration's framing, arguing that the departures represent the necessary purging of a politicized bureaucracy, and that the lawyers leaving were never truly committed to law enforcement priorities. Others, particularly those with backgrounds in law enforcement or legal practice, have expressed private concern about what the exodus means for institutional capacity and the rule of law. Democrats have faced their own complexities in responding to the story. The mass departure of DOJ lawyers provides powerful evidence for the argument that the administration is corrupting the justice system, that professional legal expertise is being subordinated to political direction, and that the rule of law is under assault. At the same time, the critique of the administration's handling of the Department of Justice sits alongside long-standing progressive critiques of federal law enforcement, of prosecutorial power, and of the ways in which the justice system has been used to advance policies and priorities that many Democrats oppose. Threading the needle between criticizing the political corruption of the DOJ while also maintaining broader critiques of federal law enforcement has required careful rhetoric and has not always been successful. The LinkedIn dimension of the story deserves particular attention because it represents something genuinely new in how institutional breakdown becomes publicly visible. In previous eras, mass departures from government agencies might be documented through personnel records, might be reported by journalists with access to internal sources, might eventually become visible through official statistics released months or years after the fact. The existence of professional networking platforms creates a different dynamic. When lawyers update their profiles to reflect their departure from the DOJ, that information becomes immediately searchable, immediately aggregable, immediately available to anyone interested in tracking the pattern. Researchers, journalists, and ordinary citizens can run searches, compile lists, track trends, and document the scope of the exodus in real time. The administration cannot hide the story because the story is being written collaboratively by thousands of individuals making individual decisions about how to represent their professional status on a public platform. The technical aspects of how the LinkedIn data can be analyzed and what it reveals are worth understanding in some detail. The platform allows users to search for individuals based on current and past employers, on job titles, on dates of employment, and on a range of other professional criteria. Researchers analyzing the DOJ exodus have used these search functions to identify lawyers whose profiles show recent changes from current DOJ employment to former DOJ employment, to track the pace of departures over time, to identify which divisions and offices within the massive department are seeing the highest attrition rates, and to correlate the timing of departures with specific events or policy decisions. The pattern that emerges from this analysis is not ambiguous. The departures are concentrated in time, are statistically extraordinary compared to historical norms, and are occurring across the organizational structure in ways that suggest systemic rather than isolated causes. The farewell posts that some departing lawyers have chosen to publish on LinkedIn add narrative depth to the statistical pattern. These posts vary widely in tone and content. Some are brief and formulaic, thanking colleagues and announcing a transition without elaboration. Others are detailed and passionate, explaining the reasons for departure in terms that make clear the ethical crisis that prompted the decision to leave. Some departing lawyers name specific policies or directives that they found incompatible with their professional obligations. Others speak more generally about the erosion of institutional norms and the politicization of legal decision-making. Taken together, these individual narratives create a collective testimony about what is happening inside the Department of Justice that is far more powerful than any official report or congressional investigation could generate. The administration's inability to control this narrative, despite its usual effectiveness at message discipline and media manipulation, speaks to the nature of the platform through which the story is being told. LinkedIn is not a news outlet that can be pressured or intimidated. It is not a government agency whose communications can be controlled. It is a commercial platform on which individuals manage their own professional presentations. When thousands of those individuals independently decide to update their employment status in ways that create a damning collective picture of institutional exodus, there is no mechanism available to the administration to suppress that information or to reframe it in favorable terms. The story tells itself through the aggregated decisions of individual professionals, and the administration's attempts to spin those decisions as normal or positive or desirable are undermined by the sheer volume and visibility of the departures. The broader context in which this exodus is occurring includes the simultaneous breakdown of institutional capacity across multiple agencies of the federal government. The Department of Justice is not the only institution experiencing mass departures of career professionals. Similar patterns have been documented at the State Department, at the intelligence agencies, at regulatory bodies across the executive branch. In each case, the dynamic is similar. Career professionals with expertise and institutional knowledge deciding that they can no longer continue under political leadership that they believe is corrupting the institution's mission or violating professional and ethical norms. The cumulative effect across the government is a hollowing out of institutional capacity, a loss of expertise and experience that will take years to rebuild, even if future administrations prioritize that rebuilding. The national security implications of this wholesale loss of institutional capacity have been noted by former officials from both parties who understand what it means when the people who know how to do the work, who have the relationships and the expertise and the institutional memory, walk out the door en masse. The Department of Justice plays critical roles in counterterrorism, in counterintelligence, in cybersecurity, in the prosecution of espionage and national security crimes. The lawyers handling those cases possess specialized knowledge that cannot be quickly replaced. When they leave, the nation's capacity to identify, investigate, and prosecute threats to national security is diminished. The adversaries who might wish to exploit that diminished capacity are certainly paying attention to the visible exodus of expertise from the institution responsible for defending against their activities. The question of what comes next, of how the Department of Justice functions with a depleted professional staff and with political appointees filling roles previously held by career lawyers, is one that legal observers are watching with deep concern. The early evidence suggests that the replacements being brought in lack both the experience and, in many cases, the professional credentials that would normally be expected for attorneys holding senior positions in the department. Reports of newly hired lawyers with minimal trial experience being assigned to complex prosecutions, of political loyalists without subject matter expertise being placed in positions requiring sophisticated legal judgment, of individuals whose primary qualification appears to be ideological alignment with the administration being given authority over consequential legal matters. These reports suggest that the degradation of institutional capacity is not merely a function of departures, but of the quality of the replacements being recruited. The long-term consequences for the rule of law in America are difficult to predict with precision, but easy to identify in general terms. When the institution responsible for federal law enforcement becomes visibly politicized, when professional legal expertise is subordinated to political direction, when thousands of career prosecutors and lawyers conclude that they cannot in good conscience continue their service, the legitimacy of the legal system itself is called into question. Citizens who believe they are being selectively targeted for political reasons have more reason to believe those suspicions. Defendants who claim they are being prosecuted for partisan purposes have more evidence to support their claims. The entire edifice of federal law enforcement rests on a foundation of perceived legitimacy, on the belief that prosecutions are being pursued because the law and the facts support them rather than because political authorities desire particular outcomes. When that foundation cracks, the consequences ripple through every case, every prosecution, every legal action the department undertakes. The visible nature of the exodus, documented in real time on a platform accessible to the public, also creates a historical record that will shape how this period is understood long after the immediate political battles have faded. Future historians examining the breakdown of institutional norms during this era will have access not merely to official documents and congressional testimony, but to the contemporaneous professional decisions of thousands of individual lawyers who chose to walk away rather than be complicit in what they understood to be the corruption of the legal process. The LinkedIn profiles, the farewell posts, the updated employment statuses, all of this becomes part of the permanent record of how a democratic institution can be hollowed out, how professional expertise can be driven away, and how political loyalty can become the sole criterion for service in positions that require independent legal judgment. The administration's panic, insofar as it is visible through the defensive public statements and the aggressive attempts to minimize the significance of the departures, reflects an understanding that this is a story that cannot be controlled through the usual mechanisms. The departures are too numerous to be dismissed as isolated incidents. The lawyers leaving are too credentialed to be characterized as incompetent or partisan. The platform through which the story is being told is too decentralized to be pressured or manipulated. The pattern is too clear to be obscured. And so the administration finds itself in the unusual position of watching a damning narrative about its governance unfold in public, documented by the aggregated professional decisions of thousands of individuals, with no effective means to suppress or reframe the story being told. The professionals who chose to leave face their own difficult consequences. Careers built over years inside the Department of Justice do not easily translate to private sector positions, particularly when the decision to leave was driven by ethical concerns rather than financial opportunity. The lawyers who departed on matters of principle may find themselves explaining that decision in job interviews, navigating professional networks that include people loyal to the administration they felt compelled to leave, and rebuilding careers outside the institution where they had expected to spend their professional lives. For many, the decision to update their LinkedIn status to former Department of Justice represented not merely a professional transition, but a profound personal sacrifice, a choice to walk away from career investment and institutional identity because remaining had become unconscionable. The courage implicit in that decision, particularly given the potential professional and personal costs, speaks to the severity of what these lawyers were experiencing inside the institution. People do not lightly abandon careers they have spent years building. Legal professionals do not casually walk away from positions in the most prestigious law enforcement agency in the federal government. When thousands make that choice simultaneously, when the pattern is visible enough to track through public platforms, when the exodus represents one of the largest mass departures of professional talent from a federal agency in modern American history, the message being sent is unmistakable. Something fundamental has broken. The institution has been compromised. The rule of law is under assault. And the people with the most direct knowledge of what is happening inside the Department of Justice have decided, in numbers that cannot be ignored, that they can no longer be part of it. The story is still unfolding. The LinkedIn profiles continue to update. The farewell posts continue to appear. The exodus continues. And with each departure, with each professional who decides that remaining is incompatible with conscience, the institution becomes weaker, the loss of expertise becomes greater, and the evidence of institutional breakdown becomes more undeniable. The administration can deny. It can spin. It can attack those who leave as partisan or disloyal. But it cannot make the LinkedIn updates disappear. It cannot rewrite the public record that thousands of lawyers are creating in real time through their individual professional decisions. And it cannot escape the judgment that history will render when future generations examine this moment and ask how it was possible for one of the foundational institutions of American democracy to be so thoroughly corrupted, so visibly hollowed out, with so many people who knew what was happening choosing to walk away rather than remain complicit. The question that remains is not whether the exodus happened. The LinkedIn data makes that undeniable. The question is whether the nation still possesses the institutional capacity, the political will, and the civic commitment to rebuild what has been destroyed, to restore independence to institutions that have been corrupted, and to hold accountable those who chose power over law. That question cannot be answered by any single investigation or election or legal proceeding. It can only be answered through the sustained commitment of citizens who understand that the rule of law is not self-executing, that democratic institutions require constant defense, and that the price of allowing expertise to be driven out, independence to be corrupted, and professional judgment to be subordinated to political loyalty is paid not just by the individuals who walked away, but by every American who depends on a justice system worthy of the name.